Hello and welcome to our Animal Care webinar. I am Ashley Greenwood, the Animal Care Extension Specialist for Otago and Southland. Soon I'll be joined by Helen Thode, DairyNZ Senior Developer and Animal Care Manager. If there's one thing in life we can be sure of, it's change, and farming is no different. With the announcement of 7 new animal recommendations from the Wintering Task Force, we need to rethink winter and recognise any elements of on-farm animal care that can be improved. One way to think differently is by imagining one of your cows is sitting at the table with you while you and your team are planning for winter. As experienced farmers, we are very aware of how life is for them during winter, so cows should be a factor in your decision making. What do you think your cow's first request would be? Maybe she might like somewhere comfortable to lie down. This was one of the recommendations from the Wintering Task Force that we will be highlighting today. A while ago, Helen and I commenced a road trip, visiting farmers in Southern and South Otago to hear how they managed to achieve a comfortable lying surface. We'll hear from 2 of these farmers shortly, but for now, Helen, could you tell us what is comfortable for a cow?
Thanks, Ashley. What is comfortable for a cow? So in terms of a crop paddock, it would be what we describe as friable or crumbly soil. So if you picked it up and rolled it into a ball, the wettest that a cow would like is when you can kind of like clump it together. It doesn't really cover your hands in too much mud. What we know is that they find very wet mud, mud where the soil structure is actually disintegrated into that sort of sloppy mud. That's uncomfortable for that, and they choose to not lie down. And we're going to look a bit at those research trials later. Using a gumboot score is one way it's often talked about. So if you put your gumboot into the ground, if that imprint quickly fills up with water, that's too wet for a cow to find comfortable. So we sort of know that they prefer that friable and crumbly end of the scale to lie down on.
So could you tell us, why is it important that our cows need to lie down?
Yes, so physics, they've got small feet, large bodies, all that weight goes down into their little feet. The calf, the unborn calf, is obviously weighing quite a bit as we go through winter. I think the SDH, Southern Dairy Hub's average newborn weight was around 23 kilos. So we're getting up there with all the amniotic fluid as well that's protecting that calf. It's getting up there in sort of 30-35 kilos. So that extra weight is going into those little feet as well. So they just like to take the weight off the feet. Rumination occurs when cows are lying down, a very important part of the forced stomach digestion process, and we want cows to put on body weight during or put on body condition during winter. So rumination is really important. Sleep also occurs when they rest and when they're lying down. So they can sleep standing up, but they prefer to sleep lying down. And cows don't actually sleep for very long in a 24-hour period, maybe 20 minutes here and there a couple of times. And that's based on their preyed upon animal. But they do really value being able to rest for long periods of time. And most animals, if you think about it, have a lying period in a 24-hour timeline, including ourselves. In fact, I did try a Google search to see if there was an animal that doesn't, and I couldn't find one.
So what have our cows been doing all winter before now?
Yeah, it's a good thought-provoking point, isn't it? And I think it goes back to your image you painted of that cow sat around the table as being part of the planning. It's like, oh, what have they been doing? And we know that cows, mammals in general, can put up with bad weather. and reduced lying as long as they get a chance to recover. So this graph shows a classic lying pattern of a southerly storm down in Southland. And you can see that cows have a reasonable lying time in the first few days. And on day 5, when the snow started, they were at about 11 hours a day, which is a really nice time for a cow. And then you can see that this lying time drastically reduces down to about a couple of hours as that snow really starts to hit. But then as the storm passes, it takes a day for those cows to recover and get back up to good lying times. But the challenge comes in prolonged wet weather. So this is very normal for a storm to have this reduced lying and then recovery time. But this study shows what can happen over time. This is a wood chip pad, no roof, so exposed to the elements over winter. And you see this really nice pattern between the increase in moisture rate of the surface and then the decrease in the lying time. And cows, just the wetter it gets, the more likely they are to stand up rather than lie down. And you would see a similar pattern on any natural surface that can absorb water. So it would be the same on crop paddocks. Cows don't mind moving through mud to get to food, especially fodder beet, which we know they are highly motivated to get to. However, once they are full and they've eaten their allocated feed amount, they start moving, looking for somewhere to lie down to ruminate and rest. And we know that cows, when they graze grass, they then have a lying period, and that sort of pattern continues through the day, and no different on crop. So if you imagine you're a cow in mud and you're full and you're thinking, okay, well, where's my space? Where's my area that I can now go and lie down and ruminate and rest? And after a while, they will get agitated and tired. And I think what's happened in the last few years, this problem has compounded as space has reduced, available space to the cow because of the increased crop yields and the requirement for more and more back fencing. So this smaller space per cow has led to more pugging, which leads to a poorer ground condition for the cow.
I heard you mention the ability to read the paddock, read the cow, and the weather. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, cows are secret squirrels. They don't give much away in terms of that discomfort, especially if you're new to dairying. And we know we have a lot of new people welcomed into the dairy sector every year, but may not have that sort of stock sense that you develop over experience. So my colleague Dawn Daly and I have been talking about sort of reading the breaks rather than reading the cow along with the weather. So if we look at this photo from Southern Dairy Hub, we've got this classic, one break was on the left is a lot wetter. So when we talked earlier about that gumboot score, you can see the imprint in that ground has been filled with water. So undesirable from a cow's point of view if she's looking for somewhere to rest. And on the right hand side, you can see the break has a lower moisture content, more likely to be closer to that crumbly surface that's more attractive to cows. So what you can do is think about, well, what's the next break going to look like if the weather continues to be wet? So if the next break is going to look pretty much like that break on the left, so you've got two 24-hour periods that are that sloppy wet, that is when you'd need to start making decisions to look at your plan B or what else you can do in the paddock and out of the paddock to manage that wet ground. And that's great that you'll be talking to the farmers about their solutions for that. And one thing you can look for, which does mean that the cows have had to lie down in undesirable ground conditions is the idea of a tide mark around the cow. So if a cow did lie down on that left-hand side, for example, that's going to leave a mark on the coat and the flank of the cow that's going to look like thick mud. So if the majority of your mob have that muddy coat, it's highly likely they've had to lie down on ground that was undesirable. So that's another thing to look at, that we definitely want to avoid that happening. It's highly likely that they laid down because they were exhausted rather than that it was the right surface for them.
Thank you for those insights. Are you able to tell us a wee bit more about those farmers we're going to be speaking to?
Yeah, so what I really enjoyed about the Tiki tour that you and I went on was the attention to detail that the farmers put into their wintering management. When I was wintering in Canterbury as a farm assistant, it was very much a dine and dash approach. So my 2IC was pretty determined we were going to get done in 2 hours, and the straw got put out at the same time the fences got dropped, and yeah, it was pretty chaotic, pretty quick, and not necessarily what the cows needed for the right nutrition. And what I really enjoyed about spending time with the two farmers we're going to talk to in particular is their attitude towards having some control over the system. So working outdoors in the environment, you sometimes feel like, oh, what are you meant to do? You're so up against it with the weather. But these farmers definitely thought there was always something they could do, and were well planned and well thought through that mitigation could occur when there was bad weather. And that's what I took. The amount of time they took on a daily basis to ensure they got it right, and their attitude towards having some control in a natural system really stood out for me.
I'm now being joined by James Matheson, James Farms in South Otago. James, could you tell us a bit more about your operation?
Yep, we're currently milking about 650 cows. We've changed quite a bit in the past, probably over the past 4 or 5 years. We've had varying numbers from 500 up to nearly 800. So we just sort of got into somewhere we're pretty happy with, a low stocking rate, less imported feed, and trying to run a more sustainable system for what we think is sustainable. So we're milking them off most of the platforms. About basically, we got just over 300 hectares, and we've got an adjacent runoff. But we've just been juggling how we use those blocks together. And we're fully self-contained, and we winter on their runoff, which is just literally just over the road. And yeah, so we're just, I don't know, it's a bit rolling. We've got quite a good variety of, we've got some nice flat land, we've got some rolling land, we've got some in between as well.
Yeah. I hear you say you've made quite a few changes. Have you made any changes around the way you winter your cows?
Yeah. Probably, I've been on this farm for, I think this is my 9th season, and I've managed it for 7 of those, I think. So yeah, when I first started, I don't think there was such thing as a wet area. We just fenced straight through anything and all sorts of stuff, which when I look back on now, definitely was not ideal, and I can understand why we've had issues, and some people still have issues. But yeah, we've made huge changes. Like everything we do, we're thinking about the paddock 2 years out sometimes. Like when you're thinking about the fertilizer going on, what bits you'd fence, what bits you wouldn't, which way the rows would go, and that type of things all changed. So yeah, going from just fencing anything into going straight through wet areas where you shouldn't have been, critical source areas, to now planning it out 2 years ahead. Quite a dramatic change.
Did you have any bad storms or experiences that you really learnt from and took things going forward?
I wouldn't say. I don't know. I wouldn't say there's been too many storms. we've just had some prolonged wet periods that have probably been more. That's probably had a bigger effect than rather than a one-off event, if you know what I mean. But yeah, like we've had some winters where you've just had ongoing, continuous rain and cold conditions, which have caused more issues than just a one-off event. Because usually you can sort of survive for a week or something of adverse weather, but it's just when it keeps going that you kind of end up in a position you can't. Yeah, find it quite difficult. But I suppose last year we had a pretty considerable snow event. I think we got a good foot at my house and up the back of the runoff where the cows were. There would have been nearly 2 feet of snow. So that was a wee bit different. But to be honest, it wasn't actually as cold as what it could have been, if you know what I mean. It was pretty dry snow. So the cows actually did bloody well.
Can you tell me how you managed your cows during that time?
So quite a reasonably steep runoff with some tussock blocks. So what we've done is we've kind of cultivated the good areas of the tussock blocks where we could, and left some pretty nice riparian zones sort of around any critical source areas and that type of thing. And I think that snow event we weren't actually too bad because we'd had quite a few cows calved, so we weren't on the runoff at the time. We still had some cows up there, but what we were doing, we had areas that we couldn't cultivate, but we sort of kept them as areas for the cows for bedding and that type of thing. So when it got really wet, we'd feed out silage up off the logging track and let the cows come back on a sort of a tussocky area. And so most nights when it got pretty miserable, we'd just feed out a load of silage. The cows would come up, and then we'd just shut them off their fodder bed so they couldn't walk back down. But in doing this, it kind of meant we couldn't really back fence, because if we back fence, they couldn't get to those areas. So kind of went against some recommendations, but in our setup, it made it more feasible.
Can you tell me what sort of triggers you guys have to know when to employ these rocky knob situations?
So basically, we go up there late in the afternoon, and just check to make sure they hadn't broken out on the fodder bed or anything like that, and just to make sure the feed was right. But we'd sort of judge it off how many of them were sitting down, chewing their cud and that sort of thing. So what we found was once they sort of found the area they'd muddied it up or weren't happy with it, there was more standing up. But most of the time, if the weather had been half quite reasonable, they were very happy sitting down chewing their cud. And it was those when it was colder, we needed to give them another option. So yeah, as long as they were sitting down happy as Larry, we'd leave them in the paddock, and if they weren't, we'd just let them have another option to sit down, because we didn't really have a lot of trouble with it. It was just in those wet periods when you have the trouble.
During that snow event, how did your cows react?
What the paddock, the fodder bed paddock they were in I'd kind of saved a pretty rough area that had some good tree sort of shelter from the prevailing wind, and then also had a lot of long tussock sort of area as well. And I think the night before the real big snow came, I think there's about a foot up the back already, and I'd just gone up there and I just wound up the fence and let them into this block because it was getting pretty gnarly up there. And I went back up later on when it was dark to make sure they're all right. And I went under the trees and I couldn't find any of the cows, and I was getting a wee bit worried. And then I started hearing the mooing coming. They just poked their heads up through the tussocks. They're all sitting down and below the tussocks. So I found that was quite interesting. None of them had chosen to sit under the trees. They all just parked up underneath big snow tussocks. So it was quite interesting.
Can you tell me what your plans are for winter 2020?
Well, it just happens that the last 2 years we've had most of our paddocks we've been able to feed silage over the off the logging track, which obviously if we're not feeding off a track, there's no way we could do it. But so we've got silage for them, and all their paddocks have been pretty well set up, so we've got a pretty good area. So in it, for example, there's a 4.5 hectare fodder bed paddock which has about 1.2 hectares of like rocky uncultivatable area at the top with tussocks and that, and we feed the silage off the track, they've sort of got 1.5 hectares to sort of bed in, and when that sort of gets really rubbishy or gets a wee bit wet, we'd just start letting them into quite a bit of it. We're fortunate we have these rough areas we can use, but we sort of fence off all the areas they could make a mess in, and sort of if it gets really crap, let them into a fresh block with some silage and that, and they do pretty well.
Do you have any messages for other farmers who are thinking of these out of paddock options?
I don't know. I guess it's just use what you've got as best you can. And so I'd love to have a big wintering shed or a great big feed pad, but it's not really feasible at the stage. And one day in the future, I would hope we would get that. But in the meantime, it's just probably trying to be a little bit cunning about how you utilise these paddocks, and maybe only half the paddock's good for cultivation, but that half, you could work it in with the rocky areas, or I don't know, the dry areas. We've probably moved away, like in the past we would have just cropped the paddock for the sake of cropping a paddock, and nowadays we just wouldn't even think about that. But one thing I've done also, I've used a wee bit of summer turnips, and we've fed. So in the wetter areas, they're still all right for a summer turnip. So the R2s have gone on that early instead of going on winter crop. I've been able to push grass out ahead of them. So instead of having to have those wet paddocks getting grazed through winter, I've sort of grazed them in the end of summer and the early autumn, and then pushed a fair bit of grass ahead. So that's for this winter. We're going to have the R1s on a lot of grass rather than going on crop. But that was one way I thought I could still turn those paddocks over in our rotation by using a summer crop.
Thank you for taking the time to share your wintering experiences with us, James. I hope winter 2020 treats you well. I would now like to welcome Suzanne Henning. Suzanne and her husband Maurice farm down in Southland. Suzanne, could you tell us a bit more about your operation?
Yep. So my husband's family's been down here in Southland at Grove Bush for just under 150 years. The family's been farming this land. We're about 300 hectare dairy farm. We actually converted it from sheep and beef back in 2007, so we've been dairying a wee while. And we run about roughly 650 crossbred, reasonably good BW cows. So it's leaning slightly towards Jersey. We're probably somewhere between a system 2 and a system 3. So we do put a little bit of grain in, and we a little bit, absolutely no more than a kilo during the milking season. We winter on, and we probably buy in about 150 tons of silage as well. So all of our young stock are on a runoff block about 3 k's down the road, and we winter on ourselves because we're kind of control freaks. So, but we use the wintering as an opportunity for regrassing. So basically, paddocks that have had a bit of damage or that need to be renovated, those go into winter crop, where we can chuck a bit of extra lime on and work them so that we can get them back into grass in usually 2 years' time. So usually the first year is Swedes or kale. And then the second year, sometimes we get away with Swedes again, or sometimes we'll put in fodder beet as a second crop, and then back into grass after that.
I heard you mention there Swedes, kale and fodder beet. Have you made any changes in the type of feed that you feed during winter?
Well, we look at the farm, the topography and the soil on the farm. We've got quite a lot of different soil types on the farm. We go all the way from nice heavy brown soils all the way to sort of pebbly, stony, gravelly soils, and then part of the farm is also in quite peaty, light soils. So there's quite a there's quite a wide variety of soil type. So basically, we try to do horses for courses. So we've got flat land as well as rolling land. So on soils that are more sensitive, we try to plant crops that are more appropriate. For example, last year we had a hill paddock that needed to be renovated, but it was about a 17-degree slope, I think. So we actually direct drilled that into kale to hopefully sort of prevent sediment loss, and also to hold the soil structure a little bit more firmly onto the side of the hill. And that worked really well. We also put lighter stock on there, so we put calves on that, so that the heavier stock didn't have didn't have the opportunity to have an impact on that soil, the lighter stock seemed to do really, really well. And then on the soil that can kind of take a little bit more punishment, on the Waikiki soils over on sort of I suppose what would it be, the northeast side of the road, we planted fodder beet and so we've got fodder beet in this year. We had Swedes in last year, to just because we want to keep the diseases to a minimum. We don't like sprays. Funny that, planting fodder beet, but yeah, having the fodder beet, it gives us opportunity to not have to double crop Swedes. We have double crop Swedes in the past, but the less sprays and the less stuff we can put on it, the better and the more we sort of like it. Yeah.
During your farming career, have you had any really bad winter weather events that you've learned from?
Really bad winter weather events. So late last year, I suppose, was pretty wet, as most people in Southland know. And what we've learned from that is that you've always got choices. You've always got options. Even if you think things are really, really bad, take a deep breath and kind of look at it critically and sort of think, okay, well, what are my choices? And I think that year we had the cows in part of the paddock and it just turned into a bog. It was soup, basically. And we looked at them, we thought, oh, this isn't really good enough. We're not really comfortable with this. What can we do? And we just shifted them to a different paddock, so normally we would have them in one crop paddock for a reasonably short period of time, sort of 30 days. And we decided, okay, well, we'll get them out of there and we'll put them into the one that we were going to graze for the second half of the winter. We'll graze that one first and see what happens then. And then we'll come in, if it's still not dried out, we'll come in from the other side of that first paddock that we started and then just, move them around, basically. We don't have standoff facilities. We don't have wintering barns or anything like that. So we sort of look at what we've got and say, okay, well, how can we make the best of this? And often the simplest solutions are sort of usually the best ones, because it's not hard to just go to the other end of the paddock or start on a different part, or just shift things around a wee bit.
That's great. Could you tell us a bit more about those in-paddock options that you use?
Okay, so we'll quite often take a paddock and we'll split it in half at the trough. So our permanent troughs are roughly sort of halfway down the paddock. So we'll put a permanent, semi-permanent, so usually wire tires with some fencing wire across there. And then we'll have one mob of 120 at one end and another mob of 120 continuing on from that first paddock group, if you like, so that they're in small groups, but you're actually shifting effectively 240 animals in that one paddock. But they're separated by that fence, so they don't tend to walk back and forth very much. And then we'll take that electric fence. So we've got a feed out fence, we've got a breakout fence, and then we've got a back fence behind them. And then we'll hook up 2 portable water troughs to that permanent trough in the middle, and we'll run it out towards where we've started. So because that trough is in the middle, the portable water trough is that you never have too much hose on it. You don't have huge, great big long lengths. It makes it a lot lighter and a lot easier for people to carry. So when we put that portable trough in, it sort of sits not right underneath the permanent or the semi-permanent electric fence. It doesn't sit right under it, but it sits close to it. So that area doesn't usually get bogged up too badly either, and it makes it really easy to shift. And if you roll it out, and then we roll it up every day until we get to the middle, and then we roll it out again. So there's only probably, I don't know, there'd be no more than probably 50 or 75 meters of hose on that trough, which makes it a lot lighter, and somebody as little as me can actually shift it. And then shifting them usually twice a day. So they get, my husband knows this better than I do, they get about 60% crop usually, and probably 40% baleage or hay, that sort of thing. A mixture of the two. We've got hay, just depending on how the season goes. Sometimes we've got more hay, sometimes we've got less. And we'll feed them their hay and baleage in the morning with a little bit of the crop, and then in the afternoon at about sort of 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we'll give them the rest of their crop, their allocated crop for that day. So they're getting fed twice a day, so they're always full. and they never sort of really mill around. They don't sort of, they're very, very settled, which stops them making mud. It's all about stopping them making mud. So yeah, and then that back fence gets moved up probably every day. Again, to keep them, the less they're moving around, the less energy they're wasting, and the more they're putting into growing their calf and staying fat and happy, really.
Could you tell us a bit more about those options and how they affect the cow's lying time?
Yep, so shifting the cows twice a day, they're always going on to fresh soil, and by the back fence coming up all the time, they're not sort of potching it too badly. In really crappy wet weather, they probably huddle. They tend to huddle together to stay warm, and as long as their bellies are full, they don't tend to mill around too much. By moving those fences, they will
make a mess, but if you bring that fence up every day, you get across the mess quicker.
Yeah, it's good.
Well, they're out of it faster. You get out of it much faster.
So could you guys tell me, what are your plans for winter 2020?
We have to stay at home this year. The flights have all been cancelled. Hoping to start the crop the beginning of June. So there'll be half the cows will go on to Swedes and half the cows will go on to fodder beet in calving mobs. So the first half to calve will go on to the Swedes, and the second half to calve will go on to fodder beet, and calves onto kale, and rising twos will go on to beet as well.
Do you have any messages for other farmers who are thinking about their in-paddock options and where they could start?
Probably always give yourself choices. Look at your paddock, set it up.
Go and have a look at the paddock and try and work out the best option when it's dry.
And what parts are dry, and take notice of it when you've just had 2 inches of rain or an inch of rain. Have a look at it and say, okay, well, actually that swale gets quite wet. We'll graze that last, or we'll start at this end, or there's shelter at this end, or just sort of have a really good, be critical and look at it critically, and don't just sort of put them in there and think, oh, well, that's what we've always done. Be nice to your cows. Think to yourself, if I was out in the wet, where would I want to be standing? Admittedly, cows have got a good thick hide on them, and they're built to be outside, but sort of a bit of compassion.
The other thing too is to see if you can have them finishing at the gate onto the lane.
Yeah.
Because if you have to take any more supplement in, you're going off the lane through the paddock that has part of the paddock that hasn't been eaten. It may mean you have to run electric fence along a fence to put a temporary lane up to get them to the back of the paddock, but it'll save a lot of mud.
Thank you so much for the explanation and for joining me today. I'm sure our fellow farmers have enjoyed hearing some real life practical examples, so thank you very much.
No worries.
Thank you.
If you would like to view our new break-fed wintering resource, it can be found on our website. If you or your team want to update or create your own wintering policy, we have a new document on our website that will assist you in completing this. Alternatively, Helen and I are both available via our 0800 number. That's 0800 for DairyNZ. Thank you.